Okay then, we are back with another reading of Minecraft The Voyage by Jason Fry. Now, again, I have Minecraft soundtrack playing in the background, same video from the same YouTuber. You can see it in the video down in the bottom right. And of course, this is Minecraft's music. I'm just reading a book. And I like listening to music when I read. I figured that Minecraft music is the best when reading a Minecraft book. Now it has me curious. Are there other stories? Does this have a continuation? Will there be a continuation if there isn't? Oh, I'd so love to get a continuation of this story. That would be amazing. Oh, right, I don't think I've mentioned this before, but this little symbol here, that is a Mojang official product. So we are on chapter 4. And then something happened that's unfortunate, but understandable, or at least I think so. Stax forgot. Oh, he didn't forget the rest of the day, or the next, or in fact, he was agitated most of the time on both days. Every stray moment, and Stax, as you've learned, had a lot of stray moments. His thoughts returned to Folk Tempora and how rude he'd been, and what a nuisance his associates would doubtless prove to be, and what the nature of his proposed business might be, and whether doing business with a Folk might mean having to put up with him being a frequent visitor, and why he had put up with visitors at all. And even thinking about all that was more than Stax could bear. But the next day, Stax planted a drift of cornflowers on the ridge above the alea birches and was pleased by the splash of blue it had added to the hillside. The day after that, he'd fixed the cracked board in the boat dock. A coal, lapis, and emerald snoozed on their backs, with their bellies pointed towards the sun. It was such a nice day that Stax thought of his disagreeable visitor only 3 or 4 times. Then the day after that, Stax trimmed back the shaggy birches and hardly thought of Folk at all. On the 4th day after Folk's visit, Stax couldn't think of anything he needed to do. He'd entirely forgotten about the flower pots and expedition to fetch clay. And so he spent the morning fishing from the dock while the cats yelled encouragement. And then he spent the afternoon puttering in his father's library. Stax was used to being reminded about his business appointments with the stonecutter office, which would send a messenger out to the estate to prevent an important visitor from finding Stax. Say, mucking up the cowpen. No, really, that had happened not once but twice. But Stax had never gone to the office to warn them about Folk, because thinking about Folk upset him too much. So no one here thought to ask about the possibility of a return visit, or warn Stax that something bad might happen. Stax forgot, and the next couple of days slipped by, tranquil and torpid, and free of not just trouble, but even the thought about it. A week after Folk's visit, Stax was sitting by the little table on the end of the boat deck. He'd finished a leisurely breakfast with a smear of honey remaining in his plate. on his skimming optimized mining practices for locating emerald deposits, a book from his father's library that was even more boring than its title might suggest. Coal, lapis, and emerald lay in a lazy S figure around him, next to the picked over bones of fishes. When he saw the first boat in the distance to the south, Stax thought it was a cloud near the horizon, but this cloud kept growing, and pretty soon Stax knew it was a boat, and that there were other boats behind it, more than a dozen in fact. Why can't that horrible man use the cove like he's supposed to? Stax asked the sleeping cats, who ignored him, unless a sleepy flick of Emerald's tail counted as an answer. As the boats drew closer, Stax grew more uneasy. He could see folks standing on the lead boat, his blonde hair shining in the sun, and he was pretty sure the man was smiling that unsettling predatory smile of his. The other boats were festooned with banners, black and purple, red and gold, green and sickly pink, and filled with rough-looking men and women, the sun flashing on swords and axes. Lapis was the first to catch awaken, and she hissed and growled low in her throat, her tail held back behind her. It'll be okay, kiddies, Stax said, getting to his feet. We heard the doubt in his own voice, and realized he no longer believed that. Move, he told himself. Go. Run. But he couldn't make his feet move. He felt frozen, like he was trapped in a dream where he had kept trying to run, but found himself stuck in place. The cat shot off up the stone stairs when folks boat ground against the side of the slip with a groan of wood. Folks stepped nimbly onto the dock as the other boats bumped up against the steps. The occupants leapt out to the shallow water, looking up at the house and laughing. Stax Stonecutter, folks said. So good to see you again. I'd introduce you to my soldiers, but well, there's quite a lot of them, and they're going to be very busy, and you'll have time to get acquainted later. Now, see here, Stax managed. This has gone quite too far. I insist that you visit our friends. That's the proper way to. Fogg had been listening silently, and with a slight smile on his face, as Stax lectured him, he picked up the optimized mining practices for locating emerald deposits, where it lay on the table, glanced at it, and then tossed it into the sea. Hey, Stax cried out, staring at the book where it was bobbing face down, and this was. That's Father's book, and now it belongs to the deep, Fogg said. A trophy for a pufferfish, maybe, a plaything for dolphins, who's to say? You have no right. Look at my associate's weapons, Stax, Fogg said, gleaming iron, sharp arrowheads, and shafts, and diamond honed to a razor's edge. Those give me the right to do as I please, as long as I'm strong enough, and ultimately in this world, that's the only right that matters. Ladies and gentlemen, take Stonecutter in hand, and make sure he has a good view. A good view? What are you going to do? But Fogg was opening the bathhouse door and directing some of his search inside, while other bandits climbed the stairs to the house. You're going to rob me? For starters, Fogg said, and gestured for several raiders to follow him up the stairs. Two burly men seized Stax by the waist and dragged him along behind them. He heard glass shattering and looked back to see a raider who had bashed his sword through the bathhouse's window, while another had brought his axe down on the railing of the dock. Help! Robbery! Help! Stax yelled, but he lived alone. Far from his neighbors, there was no one to hear and no one to help. Fogg didn't even look back, and the raiders just laughed as they hauled him up the steps, forced him inside the house. Fogg's associates had already been at work in the trophy room and the storerooms. A line of raiders passed by Stax, their arms filled with iron ingots and diamonds. They ripped down the map in the trophy room and carried it out in pieces. And Stax saw his grandmother's armor departing, one diamond piece at a time. Got a bottleneck here at the door, boss. Too many of what's going out, while too many others is going in. So make a bigger door, Fogg said. The man nodded and barked orders, and the raider smashed down the glass walls, leaving the house open on all sides. That freed them to carry out paintings, furniture, and tools, like a swarm of furious ants serving their queen. Stacks watched in horror as raiders worked in pairs outside to chop down the bridges and rip out the flower beds, while others broke down the fences, keeping the cows and pigs and sheep penned in. Confused and frightened, the sheep raced in all directions, bumping into one another and bleating in distress as the raiders laughed and jumped at them to spook them further. "Leave my animals alone," Stacks yelled. "Or you'll do what, little man?" asked a grinning bandit carrying away a stack of his father's bucks. Nothing. There was nothing he could do. Not against such numbers. There were too many of them. They were all heavily armed, and they were veteran warriors, while Stacks had rarely lifted a blade to deal with anything that wasn't vegetation. He sank to his knees in despair, and as the destruction raged around him, he was still there, limp with shock, when Fogg arrived half an hour later, whistling cheerfully as he extinguished grandmother's stone pickaxe off the wall, along with its frame. "Stacks, come with me. You're not going to want to miss this part." When Stacks said nothing, Fogg ordered two ruffians to drag him to the back door. Fogg pointed to where a pair of his bandits were standing by the door swimming pool, bundles of red explosives in their arms. "Do you know what that is, Stacks?" "TNT. It's used for mining, or rather, it's used by fools who don't care about putting themselves and others in danger." "Oh, we'll be careful. Now watch." Fogg nodded, and two bandits lit arrows and then fired them at the TNT. It ignited, and the detonation knocking both raiders backwards. Stacks raised his arms reflexively against the blast. He heard a roar of overstressed stone, and then the bottom of the pool collapsed, sending water pouring through the breach into the stonecutter mine. "I've just created the Overworld's deepest swimming pool." "When you say so, Stacks." That was when Stacks caught sight of a black shape in the shadows by the now erect pool. It was Cole. The explosion had frightened her out of whatever hiding place she had found. Stacks forced himself to look away, hoping Fogg wouldn't spot her. But Fogg had seen the black cat, just as he had seen Lapis and Emerald, who were bundled behind Cole. All of a sudden, wild-eyed fright, he gestured to the raiders. "No. Do what you want to me. Do what you want to the house, but do not hurt my cats. They've done nothing to you." "Well, neither have you," Fogg said. One of the raiders crouched down and reached out for the cats. A wide smile on his face. He made a psst noises of incitement. Stacks up his nose to yell a warning, only to have Fogg clamp a hand over it. "Stacks, that's cheating." Stacks stared in horror as the cats shrank back from the raiders' outstretched hand. Silently, he begged them not to fall for that trick. They hesitated, uncertain, and then Cole hissed and spat. A moment later, all three cats shot up the cracked direct stairs and vanished into the shadows of the garden. Stacks closed his eyes in relief, but Fogg just shrugged. "Our work is almost done anyway. In fact, it's time for the finale, Stacks." They dragged Stacks out into the yard, now marred by pits and littered with broken birch limbs. He watched as the raiders bashed down the dirt and granite walls and tore up the stairs. The animals had flown or been carried away. The fountain was shattered and befouled, and fences had been toppled. That ought to do it, so set the rest on fire. A raider poured lava from a bucket into the center of the living room, then hurried out as the remains of the carpet caught fire. Fogg nodded and marched away. Down the stone steps, the planks of the dock were floating in the water, and the little trim boathouse was a burning, roofless shell. The boat sat low in the water, overloaded with goods pillaged from the stonecutter estate. At Fogg's orders, Stacks was forced into one of the boats and made to sit by a big, black-bearded ruffian at the oars. Man was wearing Stacks' third favorite shirt, the yellow one with the red dragons on it. "Comfy, Stacks?" Fogg said and asked. "I hope so. We have a long journey ahead of us." Stacks looked at Fogg and found his face outlined with found his face outlined by the burning boathouse, a red halo of fire. It was twilight, and bright cinders were drifting through the air like little stars. "Why?" he managed to ask. "You know, everyone always wants to know that." Fogg said, and then shrugged. "It's funny. Stike stared at Fug, waiting, and it wasn't until the bandit leader had climbed into his own boat that he realized that there wouldn't be more. Fug had given him the only answer he was going to get. Well, and we'll see you on the next one.